Today I'm going to talk to you about most influential philosopher of all times. This is a bold claim, I know. And the original apostle of peace and love. He was also the most revered and most reviled philosopher. His friends, his disciples, followers, adherents, and partisans revered him almost religiously as their hero and their savior. His competitors, opponents, and enemies misinterpreted and misrepresented his teachings, reviled and vilified his person. After 800 years, they managed to close his school and silence his followers. Then the next 800 years, they either hushed him up, pretending he didn't even exist, or went on mocking and bastardizing his teachings and his name. And yet his teachings never lost their validity because they are based on the most general and most generous human experiences. And wittingly or unwittingly, we are all his followers, at least part of the time. I'm going to speak about Epicurus. Epicurus, I'll talk about his life and teachings, and then about the tried and true ways and means to produce happiness. I saw you had very interesting lectures on brilliant minds of the East. Well, this is a brilliant mind of the West. We have some brilliant minds in the West too. We don't like to remember them all because we are selective. And then I'll talk about his influence, which is not so known. Everybody wants to be happy, but they haven't taught us at school how to pursue and obtain happiness. They didn't teach us in our schools. They don't do that at schools anymore, but they did. They used to do that. For 800 years, they had schools which taught you how to be happy. I would like to go to such a school, even now, but we don't have them now. So they were taught in leisure, because the word school, schola, in Old Greek, was not the kind of Prussian school which spread all over the world with a teacher beating you if you give the wrong answer. Schola meant leisure, talking leisurely about things that interest us all. That was schola. And that was the kind of school they had. And Epicurus said, "Let no one hesitate to study philosophy while young, and let no one tire of it when old. For it is never too soon nor too late to devote oneself to the well-being of the soul." You heard some lectures about medicine. So we are into philosophy, we're into medicine too. Medicine for the soul. I won't talk very long about his life, but you have to know that he was born in 341 BC on the island of Samos. And his father was a school teacher. They weren't rich. They were colonists from Athens. And that's where he went to his elementary school, and then he studied some philosophy. And when he was 18, he had to go to Athens for his military service. As an Athenian citizen, it was his duty to perform 2 years of military service in Athens, and that was a great time for him. He went to theater, and theater was more like our opera today. They were singing. He made a good friend, Menandros, who became a famous playwright. He wrote for many comedies. And after the 2 years were over, he couldn't go back to famous anymore because these were the tumultuous years when Alexander the Great died, and his short-lived empire was breaking to pieces, and the warlords were taking over cities and islands, and Samos was occupied by somebody else, and he just expelled the Athenian colonists, and his family went to a town called, it's north of Ephesus, it's called Colophon. And so he was 20 when he went there to his family and spent the next 10 years, mostly in Colophon, but probably also to Ephesus and Rhodes, because we know that he studied with Platonists, with Aristotelian, with atomist philosophers, Democritian philosophers, and he designed his own philosophy in the meanwhile. And when he was 30, he thought he was confident enough to start teaching his own philosophy. And he went to the island of Lesbos. Was a flourishing city in Mytilene, but he didn't have all the information he needed because in Mytilene there were two flourishing schools, one Platonist, one Aristotelian, or more Platonists probably, and they didn't want competition. So they were very, very hostile to him. And in those days in Greece, if you didn't like someone, like 50 years before in Athens, Socrates, because he asked questions you didn't like the person, you accused him of impiety. You said, this person is impious, he doesn't believe in the gods of the city. And the punishment was death. So Socrates died, Anaxagoras had his problems, had to flee Athens. Many philosophers had this problem. So Epicurus didn't wait so long. He had already one good friend converted to his philosophy, Marcus, and the two of them just set out and moved to another town on the Dardanelles, on the Asian side, Lampsacus. And for the next 4 or 5 years, he was teaching his philosophy there and converted not 12 apostles, but at least 7 friends. And these were men, women, married couples. And in 306 BC, he was 35, they all moved to Athens because that was the capital of culture. And this is where they hope to be able to spread the good news, the new gospel of happiness. So they moved to Athens, and Epicurus bought a house. Not a big house, not an expensive house. It's a record he paid something like 80 minae, and that's less than a famous public speaker at that time, Gorgias. He cashed 10 times as much for one speech. So it was up on the outskirts a bit. And he also bought a garden. The garden was not near the house. And the garden was important because it's in the garden that they had their philosophical conversations. They raised their cucumbers, lettuces, and beans. Because one corner point of his philosophy was self-sufficiency. And the time came when Athens was besieged and there was a shortage of food. But the garden philosophers had their own beans, which they had to count. They had to count the beans, but nobody starved to death. They went to the house in the evening to sleep there, to spend the evening there, and also in the house the house also functioned as a publishing house. So his friends were not only talking about philosophy, they also wrote studies. Epicurus himself is on record to have written 300 scrolls. Some say it's very much, but the Christian Lactantians had written 6,000, so it's relative, what is much, what is little. And how much you copy from others when you write. So also fills pages. Yeah, they didn't have a strong copyright at that time. So this is how they lived there, and the interesting thing was, and almost revolutionary, that in his garden school were also admitted slaves and women. Slaves and women. 300 years later, we heard about another guy in Galilee who admitted women in the school. But that time in Greece, it was a sacrilege almost. Even today, I was born in Romania, in South Romania. Friends told me where the Greek influence was very strong. In the 50s, even in rural areas, the women were not allowed to show themselves in public places. They didn't go on the street, they go in the gardens. The street was for the men in the public place. In 1950, 60. So women just couldn't go where they want. They were married at 13, the father decided to whom, and that's it. Also, it's on record that this was not only the only philosophical school which admitted women on equal status, but also some of them had leadership roles. One of them, her husband was Leontius, her name was Themista. She wrote studies on the vanity of glory. And those people who read it, they say that the vanity of vanity is only the vanity of the Ecclesiastes. The Ecclesiastes must have read this study. Just as Cicero in the Roman Senate quoted, although Cicero was not very friendly with the Epicureans, he was more friendly with the Stoics and the Platonists, but he quoted Themista, so she must have written good things. And that's where he lived the second half of his life. So he was 35 when he moved there. And then when he was 70, he died. He suffered all his life. He wasn't very strong. He had health problems, especially kidney stones. And that's what killed him. Kidney stones, urinary blockages, which bore stoically. He was Stoic before the Stoics invented their teachings. Diogenes Laertius says when he felt that he's going to die, he set into a brass tub, lukewarm water, asked for wine, undiluted this time, heavy Greek wine, and had a conversation with his disciples, asked them to hold fast to his teachings, wrote a letter to Idomeneus, which I'm not going to read, only a part of it, because it says, on this blissful day, which is also the last of my life, I write this to you. My continual sufferings from urinary blockages and dysentery pains are so great that nothing could increase them. But I set above them all the joy in my heart at the memory of our past conversations. There was more pleasure in my life than pain, he said. And then, because he was very responsible, and Metrodorus, who was like his shadow, he came from Lampsacus to him, and Metrodorus had some children with Leontia, and he said, please watch over the children of Metrodorus. He deposed his last will at the Athens administration, where it has been preserved, what to do with the house, what to do with the money, and how to take care of the children of his friends. He had no children. So much about his life. Now about his teachings. He drew his teachings from three sources. One was the natural philosophers of the Ionian circle, like Anaximenes, Anaxagoras. Everybody had a theory about how the world works, and especially Democritus with his atoms. And then the Hippocratic tradition, which was very strong on the island of Samos, the fraternity of the healers. And he was also a moral reformer. We'll see how. His theory was pretty simple. He studied rhetorics, and one of the letters which we still have is written in a very nice rhetoric style. But then he said, "No, all I want is clarity. I want everybody to understand what I mean. It has to be simple and clear." So he had three compartments. Physics, how is the world? Basically made up of atoms, and the void. That's it. And then what we call today epistemology. How can I find the truth? He said, I have to trust my senses, my five senses, what I see, what I hear. I have to trust my feelings. What is good, what is bad. These are nature's stop-and-go signs. Even animals, if they eat something and it's bad for them, they won't eat it anymore. It's not good. They avoid it. This is how nature teaches us. And then he had another category, anticipations, which I won't explain very much. It's about general ideas we have about abstract notions like justice. But the most important part was answering the question, how shall I live my life? How shall I live my life? This was the question all philosophers asked in the past. The goal of my life should be happiness. I want to be happy. And how can I be happy? I can be happy if I have peace of mind. And this is a bright mind from the West, not from the East. Peace of mind and caring love. So the goal was happiness, and the Greek word was eudaimonia, and it is translated in different ways. You'll see why. And the pathway to reach this happiness was peace of mind, ataraxia, and philia, caring love. The notion of happiness was not the same as today. Today, happiness, we mean the sum of happy moments. But for the Greeks, at that time, happiness was the whole life. Short or long, it doesn't matter, but life as a whole. Is it happy? Is it a good life? And that's why people hesitate to translate it today like happiness. They translate it flourishing life, human flourishing. And the peace, the word peace is also being bastardized in the last 3,000 years. All kinds of groups of people. He defined, so when we talk about peace, we know what he meant. He meant peace of mind. And peace of mind meant ataraxia. Tarain means in Greek to disturb. So not being disturbed. Not being disturbed, being undisturbed, having this tranquility. It's translated sometimes tranquility. Cicero translated tranquility. A consequence of the word ataraxia. I translate the stress freedom. And now love. Love is probably the worst word in the world, because everybody has their own definition about love. And when we talk about love proposed and practiced by the Epicureans, we have to make this distinction. We have the erotic love, or passionate love, or romantic love, which they didn't recommend, which is characterized by sexual desire, elation and pain, anxiety and relief, altruism and jealousy, idolatry and hatred. You know, Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, all the drama. They said, no, this is not good for your happiness. This is not good. Let's not do this. There's the other kind of love, which the Greeks called philia. It's at the root of philanthropy and philosophy, which is characterized by attachment, affection, admiration, respect. When you meet the girl of your life, first you have this passionate love, which lasts from 3 months to 3 years, tops. If you don't take care, 3 years. The sooner over, the better. That's what I say. And then, for the next 30 to 60 years, you can have philia, which is personal, and it's practically the same for which St. Paul used the word agape. I'll tell you why he used another word. The disinterested love, but caring love. And this caring love went so far that you should be able to die for a friend. He said, the wise man will on occasion die for a friend. 400 years later, somebody who is conventionally called John, never been identified who John was, but it says in the gospel that greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. We can start feeling something about his influence. He wanted to expel suffering. His mission statement, if he had been asked to write for his website a mission statement, this is his mission statement. This was his mission. Not to sound smart, not to get a tenure at a university. That was not his goal. He didn't even preach in public places. He preached his philosophy in his own house and garden. And the school was a community, because we say we cannot educate a child alone. It takes a village. It takes a community to educate ourselves. We are social beings. We cannot sit in a corner alone for 50 years. Well, some folks tried in Egypt in the desert eating locusts, but I'm not sure that's the right way. Most of us develop ourselves in society, in groups. And so was the school. It was a community. And they concentrated on learning not only the teachings, which I showed you the theory, but also how to apply in their daily lives this, and in a friendly way, because some of these teachings are very close to what the Cynics said. But the Cynics were provocative. The Cynics despised everybody, provoked everybody, and were unfriendly. Whereas for Epicurus, friendliness was a core notion. And they organized their school as a boarding school. So usually it was between 50 and 25 people who lived there, and the staff was meritocratic. So, for instance, his brothers never reached the highest ranks, even if they were his brothers. Others did. It was like, first you were allowed to teach a group, like a trainer, and then a personal coach to teach one-on-one, those who are more advanced. They had different names for this. I don't go into. They had graded school books. And the school books are very interesting because he had, for instance, the 37 rows on physics, and then he made an epitome, a condensed, concentrated version in 2 letters, which we have today, and then concentrated more and more. His basic teachings are available today in the so-called 40 authorized principles, or Kyriai doxai, the authorized opinions, 40 pieces, and everything is in it what you need to start. Some of his followers concentrated even more. In Herculaneum near Pompeii, they found this carbonized papyri, and they found lots of things by his disciples, and one was a poem in 4 lines, which is called the tetrapharmakos, the fourfold cure or fourfold medicine. And so people are scared of all kinds of things, and that's bad. Anxiety is bad. And what were they mostly scared of? Of destiny or God or the gods. Some God will come and punish them. And then they were scared to die because of Hades and that realm from whose door no traveler returns. Scared them. And then the other thing that scared them was not to be able to get the bare necessities. And then pain. And he said, okay, these are the 4 major scary things, so let's deal with these ones first. And they went then into detail. I won't teach you the whole analysis of desires, but it's a different approach than the Stoics or the Buddhists who want to extirpate all the desires. The Epicureans are more discerning, and they said, oh, there are 3 categories: natural and necessary things, needs, natural but not necessary, and things which are vain desires, neither natural nor necessary, like fame, power, glory, money, and so on. The natural necessary to live, water and food and shelter and so on. The problematic was the one which are natural but not so necessary, because if you don't satisfy those needs, you won't die, it won't hurt you. But you have to think about it. And so they were trained to make a double choice. So they learned to make a clear distinction between choosing an attitude toward an action in a given sphere and choosing to do or not to do that action. For example, they learned that the right attitude toward necessity is to deny it, toward fortune, to defy her, toward political life, to avoid it, towards pain, to ignore it, and towards friendship, to look upon it as the most precious of all acquisitions of the wise man. The proper attitude toward pain, for instance, is to regard it as inherently evil and to be avoided. Nevertheless, in the individual case, the lesser pain, such as the surgeon's knife, is endured for the sake of the greater good. Or the proper attitude toward food is to prefer a simple diet, but it doesn't preclude or even approves occasional indulgence. They met every 20th, they were eating the 20th, because every month, the 20th, they had their feasts, the agapes. In spite of the choice of attitude, we will have to make an individual choice before every significant action. And let's take an example at a universal source of pleasure, or what it used to be, sex. The basic approach is it's a good, so it belongs to the category of tokalon, of the good things. And Epicurus is on record to have said, to have written, "Nor do I know what I could understand the good to be if I set aside the pleasures we get from sex, from listening to songs, from looking at beautiful shapes, from smooth motions, or any pleasures which affect a man's senses." Okay, so basically, it's good. In principle, as they used to say in Radio Yerevan, in principle, it's good. But then, let's see the individual case. They had this desire check every time. And when dealing with sex, Epicurus personally placed so many caveats that they presented the experience almost as more trouble than it's worth. He argued that one may indulge in sexual intercourse provided one does not ruin one's health by contracting some DD or squander one's fortune. The courtesans were pricely in Athens. Or stain one's reputation, or drain one's energy, or waste one's time that could have been spent on better things. Now, his views on sex cannot be understood anachronistically within the context of our restrictive Judeo-Christian sexual mores. The Greeks had a much, much, much more permissive mores regarding sex. For instance, almost every philosopher is on record to have discussed in symposium, which were philosophical discussions while drinking wine. That was a symposium. And one of the topics was whether it is better to have sex before or after dinner.